Heavy Metal wasn't just an animated film, it was the movie that proved adult animation could exist outside Disney, built by animation studios on 3 continents simultaneously, and kept off home video for 15 years because of a music licensing disaster nobody had planned for. Directed by Gerald Potterton and produced by Ivan Reitman, it grossed $19.6 million on a $9.3 million budget and became one of the most actively screened midnight movies in cinema history. Here are 15 facts you never knew. 15. The story that was never theirs to tell the film as you know it is held together by the Lochnar, a glowing green orb that terrorizes a young girl while showing her visions of evil across the universe. It's simple, it's effective, and it was entirely Plan B. The original framing device was Arzak, the iconic wordless character created by French artist Jean Giraud, known as Mobius, who had been one of Heavy Metal magazine's defining voices since its earliest issues. Producer Ivan Reitman built the entire connective structure of the film around Arzak and Mobius's world. Scripts were written, sequences were developed. Then Giraud looked at what was being done with his creation and refused permission entirely. The Arzak framework was scrapped overnight. Screenwriters Len Blum and Daniel Goldberg invented Tar-Na and the Lochnar as direct replacements. A second framing story was then developed and actually animated, a carousel sequence where the girl experiences the stories through magical mounts. Before that too was cut. What survived in the finished film was the third version of a story that was never supposed to exist at all. Fact 14, the villain's name in the Den segment is Cthulhu spelled backwards. In the Den segment, the evil entity that the muscle-bound hero battles is named Ulatk. The name was carried directly from the original Heavy Metal magazine story and embedded in the film without explanation or announcement. Spell it backwards and you get Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic god of chaos, the tentacled horror at the center of his Cthulhu mythos. The reference was placed there for anyone paying close enough attention to catch it. Most audiences didn't. The film hid a Lovecraft tribute inside a segment about a nerdy teenager who wakes up in a fantasy world with a muscular body and no idea what to do with it. The cosmic horror underneath the adventure story was spelled out in reverse the entire time. Fact 13, it started because National Lampoon's Animal House made too much money. Heavy Metal. The film exists because of a beer-soaked college comedy in 1978, following the massive and unexpected success of National Lampoon's Animal House, which Ivan Reitman had produced. Reitman and National Lampoon publisher Leonard Mogul began looking for their next project that would appeal to the same young adult male audience. Mogul also published Heavy Metal magazine, the American edition of the French underground comics publication Metal Hurlant. The two men recognized that the magazine's mix of science fiction, fantasy, graphic violence, and explicit sexuality translated naturally into an animated film for the same demographic that had made Animal House a phenomenon. The same producer who had put John Belushi in a toga gown set about adapting some of the most visually ambitious adult illustrated fiction in the world into a feature film. The connection between a fraternity party and a cosmic green orb of evil is Ivan Reitman. Fact 12, John Landis was originally hired to direct Up Then Left. The first director attached to Heavy Metal was not Gerald Potterton, it was John Landis, who at the time of his hire had just come off Animal House and was about to make The Blues Brothers. Ivan Reitman brought Landis in during the early development phase in 1978 when the project was first being assembled. Landis departed before the production took its final form. The specific reasons for his exit were not documented publicly in detail. The production went through significant changes in concept and structure during those early years, and Landis moved on to other projects. Gerald Potterton, a veteran animator whose short film, The Railrodder, had featured Buster Keaton and won international recognition, was ultimately engaged as director. The man who would later direct An American Werewolf in London walked away from a film about animated monsters, violence, and a malevolent cosmic orb. The coincidence is the kind that follows a career. Fact 11, multiple animation studios on 3 continents worked simultaneously. Heavy Metal was produced using an approach that was unusual for 1981 and is now standard practice in the animation industry, multiple studios working on different segments at the same time. Rather than producing each story sequentially through a single animation house, The production distributed the segments across facilities in Canada, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere, allowing parallel production that dramatically compressed the timeline. Director Gerald Potterton coordinated with over 1,000 artists, animators, and technicians across 17 countries, doing it without the digital communication tools that make such coordination routine today. Columbia Pictures had made the schedule pressure explicit: deliver the film by July 1981 or lose the distribution deal entirely. The only way to meet that deadline was to run multiple productions simultaneously. Every segment of Heavy Metal was being animated at the same time in different countries by different teams under a single director who couldn't visit all of them at once. Fact 10, the entire voice cast came from one Canadian TV show. Ivan Reitman assembled the voice cast for Heavy Metal, largely by calling the performers he already knew from his previous productions and from Canadian television. The result was an accidental reunion of SCTV, the sketch comedy series that had been producing some of North America's most distinctive comedy talent throughout the late 1970s. John Candy, Joe Flaherty, Harold Ramis, and Eugene Levy all provided voices for the film, with most of them voicing multiple characters across different segments. Ramis and Candy were also working with Reitman simultaneously on Stripes, which released the same year. John Vernon, who had played Dean Wormer in Animal House, rounded out the ensemble. A film about science fiction, adventure, and cosmic evil was voiced primarily by Canada's most beloved comedians, most of whom were doing 3 jobs at once and apparently found the time. Fact 9, Dan O'Bannon wrote 2 of the segments. Among the writers who contributed to Heavy Metal was Dan O'Bannon, the screenwriter behind Alien Dark Star, and in the same era, the Screamers screenplay he had written for Irwin Allen. O'Bannon wrote 2 of the film's segments: Soft Landing, the brief opening sequence in B-17, the World War II zombie horror story that many viewers consider the film's most viscerally effective segment. The B-17 sequence, a bomber crew transformed into undead creatures by the Loch Nar during a mission, carries O'Bannon's specific horror sensibility, confined space, isolation, and something wrong with the people around you that you only understand too late. The same writer who had placed a crew of space truckers against an alien organism placed a crew of wartime airmen against a supernatural infection. The structural instinct was identical. O'Bannon had found the template that worked and applied it to a different war. Fact 8. Tarna was rotoscoped from a Toronto model. The film's most celebrated segment, Tarna, the silent warrior who provides the film's emotional climax, it was produced using rotoscoping, filming a live human performer and tracing her movements frame by frame onto animation cells. The performer used as the physical reference for Tarna was Carol Desbiens, a Toronto model who was filmed performing the character's movements, poses, and action sequences so that the animators had accurate human motion to work from. The result gave Tarna a physical specificity and a weight of movement that the film's other characters, animated through more conventional means, didn't quite match. Desbiens received no screen credit for her contribution. The character she physically embodied became the film's most enduring visual icon, appearing on more merchandise, posters, and fan art than any other element of the production. A Toronto model's uncredited physical performance is the foundation of Heavy Metal's most recognizable image. Fact 7. One shot in the film is not animated. Near the end of Heavy Metal, a house explodes. The shot was planned as a rotoscope sequence, live footage of a real explosion traced into animation, matching the technique used elsewhere in the film. Time ran out. Columbia Pictures had moved the release date forward from October to August 7, 1981, compressing the post-production schedule past what the team could complete. The explosion sequence could not be finished as animation. The production used the raw live-action footage of the real explosion directly, cutting it into the finished film. Without animation treatment, it remains, across the entire 90-minute running time, the only non-animated shot in Heavy Metal. Most viewers have never noticed it. It passes in seconds, surrounded by animation, and the eye accepts it as part of the film's visual language without registering the distinction. A missed deadline produced the only moment of accidental documentary filmmaking in the history of adult animation. Fact 6. Elmer Bernstein conducted the Royal Philharmonic for a film about animated nudity. Heavy Metal is remembered primarily for its rock soundtrack. Black Sabbath, Cheap Trick, Devo, Blue Oyster Cult, Journey, Sammy Hagar, and Stevie Nicks all appear on the record. Less remembered is that the film also has a full orchestral score composed by Elmer Bernstein, the Academy Award-winning composer behind The Magnificent Seven, To Kill a Mockingbird, and The Great Escape. Bernstein conducted the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra for the score, recording the music with one of the world's most prestigious ensembles. The Tarna sequence in particular carries most of the orchestral score, giving the film's climax a musical weight that the rock tracks couldn't have provided. A composer of Bernstein's stature working with the Royal Philharmonic on an adult animated film featuring graphic violence and explicit content represents one of the more incongruous professional collaborations in film music history. The orchestra performed it anyway. The score is genuinely accomplished. Nobody in the Royal Philharmonic has discussed it at length in public. Fact 5, music rights kept it off home video. For 15 years, Heavy Metal was released theatrically. In August 1981, it was not available for home purchase or rental until 1996, 15 years later. The reason was music. The songs licensed for the film had been cleared for theatrical release, and for the soundtrack album only. The licensing agreements did not include home video rights. In 1981, home video was a young and rapidly evolving market, and the rights structures around it were not yet standardized. Many productions from this era discovered the same problem when their theatrical licenses failed to anticipate the formats that followed. Renegotiating rights with the full roster of artists, Black Sabbath, Devo, Journey, Cheap Trick, Blue Oyster Cult, and others, took over a decade. During those 15 years, Heavy Metal continued playing on cable television and at midnight screenings without restriction. It was simultaneously one of the most actively screened films in the Columbia Pictures library, and completely unavailable to buy. The film that couldn't be purchased was the one everyone wanted to own. Fact 4, 2 songs were replaced in home video releases. When Heavy Metal finally reached home video in 1996, it arrived with alterations. Devo's Through Being Cool and Black Sabbath's E5150, both of which appear in the theatrical cut, were replaced with different music in the home video version. The rights to those specific tracks could not be secured for home video at terms the production could meet. Both songs had already found homes elsewhere. E5150 appeared on Black Sabbath's Mob Rules album, and Through Being Cool on Devo's New Traditionalists. Viewers who had seen the film in theaters or at midnight screenings experienced a version that no longer fully existed in the home release. The theatrical cut and the home video cut were not the same film. A movie kept off home video for 15 years by music licensing arrived on tape and disc, with the music partially changed anyway. Some rights disputes don't have clean resolutions. They have compromises that both sides live with. Fact 3, it was the most active title in Columbia's entire library. Despite its modest theatrical box office, $19.6 million on a $9.3 million budget, Heavy Metal became, through the 1980s and early 1990s, the single most active title in the entire Columbia Pictures library. TIFF's Canadian Film Encyclopedia documents this directly. The film played midnight screenings continuously across North America for over a decade, generating consistent revenue from a devoted audience that returned repeatedly and brought new viewers with each screening. The midnight movie circuit, in which had previously been dominated by the Rocky Horror Picture Show, gave Heavy Metal a theatrical longevity that no conventional release strategy could have produced. A film that its studio considered a modest commercial performer turned out to be one of its most reliably profitable properties across a 15-year period through a distribution channel that the studio had not specifically planned for. Heavy Metal made more money in the dark at midnight than most films make in their opening weekends. Fact 2, it was briefly the highest-grossing Canadian film ever made upon its release in 1981. Heavy Metal became the highest-grossing Canadian-produced film in history. The record did not last long. In 1982, Porky's, a raucous teenage sex comedy produced in Toronto, surpassed it and claimed the title. Two Canadian productions held the record for highest-grossing Canadian film in consecutive years, and both of them were, by any reasonable critical standard, not the kind of films that typically anchor a national cinema's commercial legacy. A country that had produced David Cronenberg, Norman Jewison, and Adam Egoyan held its all-time domestic box office record for 12 months with an adult animated film featuring a malevolent green orb, and then surrendered the title to a film about high school locker rooms. Canadian cinema in the early 1980s was making the most of its tax shelter era with remarkable consistency of purpose. Fact 1, the soundtrack album wasn't released on CD until 1995, 14 years after the film. The heavy metal soundtrack was released on vinyl in 1981 and reached number 12 on the Billboard charts. It was not released on CD until 1995 and 14 years after the film, and 1 year before the film itself finally reached home video. For over a decade, fans who wanted the music in a format that wasn't a vinyl record had no official option. Individual tracks surfaced on the artist's own albums. Blue Oyster Cult's Veteran of the Psychic Wars appeared on Fire of Unknown Origin. Devo's Working in the Coal Mine appeared on New Traditionalists. But the compiled soundtrack in the sequence that appeared in the film was inaccessible in any format other than a deteriorating LP for the better part of 15 years. A film whose soundtrack was considered one of the defining rock compilations of 1981 could not be heard in its complete intended form. Until the mid-1990s, the music that had made the film famous was the same music that had made everything about the film so difficult, and there you have it. 13 weird facts about heavy metal, a film born from Animal House's profits, voiced by Canadian comedians, animated on 3 continents simultaneously, and kept off home video for 15 years by the same music that made it legendary. Which fact hit hardest? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the films that played at midnight and refused to leave. Until next time.